Did you watch the most recent presidential debate, and how do you feel that it went?
I listened to it while I played poker with my friends, and we were sitting there talking about some of the topics they brought up. And I feel like policy wise, not enough was discussed. Like, that's my biggest problem with modern debate is policy isn't discussed nearly enough. The discourse is more personally oriented.
Okay. Um, Towards the personal stuff, what do you think? Was it like just name calling? Where was most of that time spent?
Yeah, it's mostly on Trump's side of thing, like name calling, and on Harris's side, it's more of like, oh, he's a felon, and they're trying to. I'm not good at formulating my words. Trying to paint a bad picture of each other. Like Trump does it through name calling, and Harris likes to bring other unrelegated things in. Like we're in a policy debate, right? We're supposed to be talking about what we're gonna do as president. Why are we sitting here name calling each other? It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah. What issues matter most to you, and then what policies specifically would you like to see passed?
So for me, I'd say in terms of our foreign policy that we need to be taking a firmer stance in the world because we have especially with like Russia and Ukraine or China and Taiwan or China and most of Southeast Asia, honestly, they're being very aggressive, and it's very much a two-on-one fight because the EU is being kind of wishy-washy because they've built their dependence on China and Russia a lot more than we have, and we're the only other side that they have to rely on. And if say a conflict were to happen between the two sides, like Russia and China versus the United States and the EU, we'd be having not only to supply ourselves, but a good chunk of the EU's economy as well.
That's really interesting you brought that up and have that perspective. Many, if not most, of the Gen Z people, the young people I've talked to on campus, I'd say a majority of them have a more isolationist perspective, saying we need to stop engaging in these foreign conflicts. What is your response to that?
Well, see, the thing about that is I also support us minding our own business. I don't think we need to be the world police per se, but when it comes to, tyrants such as Putin or Xi, like you're never going to be able to maintain isolationism against someone like that, especially when it comes to China and Taiwan, because Taiwan is the top manufacturer of microchips in the world, and a decent chunk of our economy and military is reliant on that chip production. Now we're starting to build our own, with a new Intel plant going up in Idaho that is capable of producing a zero point zero 0.05 millimeter chips, which is advanced. But Taiwan is the only country on the planet, to my knowledge, that builds the the 0.03 millimeter chips, which are significantly more powerful. And so China threatening that supply threatens the basis of our economy and our ability of self-defense. So in order to maintain a more neutral stance on the world stage, we have to stand up to dictators like this. If you go back and you look at Neville Chamberlain and his handling of appeasement during World War II, it's the same thing going on with Russia. Every time Putin throws a fit or something, he rushes his army to the border and he demands the West to either stand down or stop pushing. So like when he invaded Ukraine, I think that kind of was a shot in his own foot because it inherently caused Sweden and Finland to join NATO, which was one of his main goals of attacking Ukraine, was stopping the expansion of NATO.
Absolutely, that's a great historical example you brought up with Chamberlain. How do you feel about the state of the United States economy right now?
I believe that we need to bring manufacturing industry back to the United States. With the way that the federal regulations have been as of the past 20 30 years, it's made a lot harder for companies to actually get benefit from producing in-house. So that's why they outsource their production to other places like Mexico, India, Vietnam, China. And if we want to actually be able to become more of an isolationist, neutral country. We need to lay back a little bit in terms of regulation on factory and allow that industry to be able to flourish more in-house in the United States. Like you take a look at Detroit. 50 years ago, Detroit was the biggest manufacturing city on the planet. And now if you go to Detroit, a good third of it is deserted because there's no commerce whatsoever. Like the production facilities, if you look like, the stuff that's gone on with Ford or Boeing recently, I think that really exemplifies, the problems with our own manufacturing. Like if it's not strictly, supported by military, or even in the case of Boeing, if it is, there's a chance of it being fundamentally flawed due to the regulation imposed on it.
Interesting. Um, who do you think between the two candidates speak most to you policy-wise?
I tend to lean more towards the Trump uh, policy agenda just because it's more familiar to me. That and I economically I agree with it a lot more than Harris's. But at the same time, when Trump says stuff like "I could end the war in Ukraine in a minute," I end up thinking to myself, how would you manage that? Because ever since 2016, Putin has not danced to the same song as you, and it's got me thinking like, he could go in with that same attitude that he's always had, and with Putin's declined mental state, it could end up starting a major war. We've had Russian drones flying into Latvia, Romania, and Poland, and crashing in and killing people, and the real possibility of Article 5 being triggered, especially since Article 5 in NATO itself has been altered. It's no longer a single actual like 9/11 style event. It can be an accumulation of similar events. So smaller things built up across different countries could trigger Article 5. So I think that a very fine line needs to be written with that. You need to be able to maintain economic prosperity while making sure that peace is sustained.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel that the slow eastward expansion of NATO, not justified, but prompted Vladimir Putin to do what he did?
I think it's definitely a part of it, but it's also because Vladimir Putin, one of his main goals in office ever since he started doing politics and retired from the KGB was the restoration of the USSR. And especially when you do, like, this is something I'm very interested in, but if you look at the fall of the USSR in 1991 and you look at the celebrations in Poland and East Germany, like there's no celebration in human history greater or more extravagant. And it's because of the hope of hey, we're not under this heel anymore, we actually have the ability to do our own. And that's still really prevalent in Germany. It's why Germany has been so firm on demilitarization and trying to get rid of that east-west divide that is still very much there. And especially in countries like Poland or the Baltic states, they are very, very concerned about Russia being very forward in the way that Vladimir Putin has been since he got elected in 2000. So I believe that Putin, like NATO eastward expansion, is more or less caused by Russian aggression. It's the fear of being under that same heel that pushes them to want to be a part of NATO, because it's a guarantee that if we are attacked, we have friends coming to help us to make sure that we don't get put in that same situation.
Very well said. Lastly, so where do you get your news from? And then how often do you check that outlet, those outlets? And then
Oh, Lord.
to what extent does social media play a role in the information you take in?
I try my best to go independent with my news. I don't trust bigger news platforms like, CBS or Fox or CNN. Like, I feel the politicalization, like the polarization between those bigger outlets is very hard to look past. So if I'm forced to rely on those big outlets for a topic, I'll look at both of them and compare what they're saying, and then only take the things that they both say as actual news. The rest of it I leave with large grains of salt. I really like ground news. I think that helps a lot with finding extra information. The more information you can get on a certain subject, the more informed you are. So when you like take Ukraine for example, you can't trust everything Kiev says. The same thing, you can't trust everything that Moscow says. I think independent sources are by far the best when it comes to getting reliable information.
Do you have any that you would recommend?
Not particularly, just because the way that news is, especially internationally, it comes from so many different sources. You can't really trust or depend on one singular source. You have to maintain an openness to it.
Gotcha. All right. Well said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, man.